Welcome back, everybody. I'm Tommy McCarthy, and this is Let's Talk Cyber. Well, I'm delighted to welcome back to Let's Talk Cyber Ruth Wandhöfer, who is the head of European markets at Blackwired. Welcome back, Ruth.
Hi, Tommy. Great to be back. Thank you.
Lovely to see you again. It feels like a lifetime ago, but I would say probably 3 weeks ago. We caught up in Bahrain at the AICS.
Yes,
I didn't get a great deal of time, Ruth, to ask you to give us a bit of background story to yourself. Dr. Ruth Wandhöfer. Well, tell us a little bit about who you are, Ruth, where you're from, where you've come from, and what you're doing now.
Yeah. So I spent more than 23 years primarily in the financial services industry, which is, of course, a very important customer segment for cybersecurity. Money is the lifeblood of the economy. So I spent most of my career in Citigroup and the global transaction banking business. Again, it's about value transfer, data, technology and how all of this is advancing. And then when I was global MD in the transaction banking business, eventually I decided to retire from banking, and I became a non-executive director. So I was on different boards, such as the London Stock Exchange Group. I'm on the board of an Irish bank, board of fintechs as well, digital identity, all these new tech comers in terms of how the landscape is changing and how to adjust to it. But in my industry experience, while I was still at Citi, I spent several years, 11 and a half to be precise, chairing a cyber payments group in the European Payments Council. So for a very long time, I was engaging with cybersecurity experts in the financial services industry and Europol, particularly around how do we mitigate threats, how do we information share very quickly. These were the early days of the DSCO frauds, phishing attacks, etc. And years later, as I was changing my career yet again, I stumbled across Blackwired and I was introduced to them. They were a growth company and I joined them as a board advisor initially. And then earlier this year, I decided to get in more full-time because it's a very exciting business. But I also teach at university. So I teach fintech at Bayes Business School, used to be CAS. So I always combine teaching, industry influence, working with regulators and central banks around tech change, central bank digital currencies, and cyber as that critical element, because the more you digitize, the more cybersecurity becomes essential to survival.
Well, that explains a lot, and you're certainly keeping your hand in all the right spaces there, still from an academic perspective, because it's good to understand, how academia is changing in the approach to this industry, given the fast pace that we're moving at. The threat intelligence side of life with Blackwired kind of explains a lot about the financial services and banking sector you've come from. So it all makes complete sense now, Ruth. Now, I didn't get that context in Bahrain, but I'm delighted now all the pieces of the jigsaw are coming together. We did touch on very briefly when we were in Bahrain about the rate of global cyber threats that we're seeing and attacks. And I believe they're talking about in excess of £200 billion lost through cyber attacks and cybercrime this year alone. I mean, that in itself is colossal. But it doesn't seem to be making a difference in what we do and how we combat these threats. Why would you suggest there doesn't be much of an impact in the different measures people are putting in place? Why are we not seeing a significant improvement in the threat landscape sort of environment right now?
Yeah, I mean, as we talked about last year with Ian, my colleague, 2025 was going to be the year of the machine. And frankly, we are now moving very soon into the year of the absolute machine cyber war. And you could argue that we already started it, certainly in this quarter and potentially the last. The scale and breadth of attacks is, of course, a direct function of the ubiquitous availability of AI to the fraudster landscape, to the nation-state actor landscape. And what you said here, I mean, the whole point is that the industry invests more than 200 billion to actually fight cybersecurity risks, to fight the adversary. But that hasn't paid off whatsoever. And instead, we have more than trillions of losses. And I think the big question is really, how many losses do we truly have? If you just look at simple cases, very specific cases like Jaguar Land Rover, you have one particular company, you have the impact on profitability, you have the impact on share price, but then you have the whole collateral fallout of the supply chain ecosystem that goes with this, which is, of course, why in the UK it has led to actual percentage point reductions in annual GDP of the country, which is really scary. And it shows you that we are in a cyber war and nation-state actors and criminal actors acting on behalf of nation-state actors are probing our defenses, in this instance in the UK.
And you touched on something really interesting there, Ruth, and I think it's fair to say everybody has become more apparent of the impact that AI is having globally, both from the threat landscape perspective, but more importantly, from a defensive point of view. Tell me a little bit about what Blackwired are doing to tackle these problems, and do you believe there's a potential paradigm shift needed to make a difference?
Yeah, I mean, if we think about threat intelligence, which is potentially the sort of area you might associate with what we're doing because we are in the intelligence business in that sense, I would say in the true sense, because our founder has worked in the intelligence community for decades with real intelligence. And I think the problem is still that people do intelligence sharing, they use open source data, but all of this data, as we say, is right of bang. It's far too late. It always reflects a detect and response mentality. Something has gone wrong. Let's see what it is. Let's share quickly so that maybe we protect other assets from being impacted. But it really doesn't cut it any longer. And what we decided in Blackwired, and our founder particularly decided, seeing what was going on in the world, was to actually be preventative and proactive and use AI as one of the tools to go head on against the threat actor, to identify who they are, where they sit, what they're preparing, how they're deciding to attack one particular organization, to aim, how they're getting ready with different attack campaigns, phishing, ransomware, Trojans, and others, which is the readiness phase, and then, of course, the fire phase when they get ready to trigger. And this is sort of our aim, ready, fire methodology, which is really how the adversaries always operate. But the most important piece here is that instead of just sharing something post-event, we are looking towards the threat only, and we are seeing as threat evolves in relation to a particular organization, so very specific. And we basically capture all of this information and evidence in order to then instill this into all of your endpoints as an organization so the attack can't hit. And this is really a way of preventing attacks, which is what you need to do because we have serious going concern issues with major corporations around the world and governments because there's so much fallout and nobody can stand those losses anymore.
Yeah, Ruth, it's really interesting actually, because I am aware of a number of different threat intelligence capabilities out there. It would be naive to think that Blackwired are the only one. However, I have to say that you guys are definitely um, defining the methods in cybersecurity, which is really interesting. And I am aware of the fact that recently you launched Third Watch. Why don't you walk us through a little bit about the key components in Third Watch? And more importantly, Ruth, and I brought the point up about other threat intelligence platforms. What are your differentiators? What makes you different from other threat intelligence platforms? So Third Watch,
Yeah,
tell us a little bit about that.
yeah. Yeah. So I think, again, particularly as you hear AI as the catchword all around the industry for some time now, there's always some element of AI in it, but AI can only be as helpful to you if you actually have right data, if you have a good approach, if you understand how threat actors operate. So a lot of the tradecraft of understanding the threat landscape with our founder and the team around it has really been driving a very informed approach to setting up this platform and getting the output we're getting today. So the first element is that the organization is building on over 10 years of continuous learning and research and refinement, as well as data collection. So we have a vast data lake of cyber artifacts. So we know what the weapons look like. And if you look into the adversary landscape today, there's a lot of syndication. People are not reinventing the wheel every time. There are variations to existing codes. We know it from Stuxnet and WannaCry and Petya and NotPetya and all of these. There's always elements of core where you can match back to something that you've already verified as being bad from the past. So having a very substantial data lake is the first element of the ingredient. Then, of course, you need an AI model. You need to be able to basically leverage this data as you're starting to observe the external threat landscape. We have lots of sensors in place to capture information from the surface web, from the deep web, and from the dark web. We are very specialized in the dark web. We're also specialized in zero-day identification. And as we see this data coming in, We're starting to match it with our data lake, but we're also identifying sometimes new forms of data where there's no direct match so quickly. And then you will need to understand what is it. So you have to use a very secure process to explode a file and to understand where it came from, where it was supposed to be linking to. And all of these ingredients together give us the ability to start visualizing the threat landscape that surrounds an organization, to see which threat actors are building something, how fast are they progressing with campaigns in the build stage, are they firing? Is the firing, going to hit you tomorrow, today? And all of this data is, of course, a critical evidence-based ingredient to ingest in an automated way to orchestrate into all your endpoints. So here we are really talking about a fully evidence-based approach. And that means there are no false positives. If I look at the industry, even financial services in compliance or in cyber in this instance, people are challenged with false positives left, right, and center. And you have a lot of human teams that have to verify whether something is really an alert or not. And that in itself is a significant cost. So having something that gives you just the right data and that automatically puts it into your defenses so that the attack can't get through is really the antidote that you're looking for. And that's sort of how we're doing it. There's, of course, a lot more detail. The way we combine data and execute is, of course, tradecraft and our secret, but it is really down to having a very good understanding of the landscape, having a very good data set that constantly renews and adds, and, of course, matching those two in order to create what we call direct threat intelligence. And this is where it's really differentiating to existing threat intelligence, which is a lot of verified, useful data, but after the fact. Of course, not for everybody after the fact. Whilst here, it's much more around, okay, I'm bank A. I want to know what is surrounding me. Is somebody getting in? Is somebody potentially already inside? And having the machine to do this in real time, to think, to see, to match, and also to see when some malware that is already inside an organization eventually starts to communicate outside. Because this is how we see that somebody is already compromised, because eventually a dormant bad file will need to communicate to the outside. So that's how we're looking at it from both sides.
Yeah, that seems to me like you have an army of AI intelligence officers all around the world, but obviously using technology to define and obviously improve the economic benefits of using a solution such as Blackwired. I can see the third watch, how you must be able to really drill down on cost saving exercises for clients, not having to have that human intervention, but to be, utilizing technology and AI. I can see massive benefits there, Ruth. I think
And
that
it's
probably,
maybe just to add, I think what is really interesting is also it is because we have the data, we use graph technology, which I even used years ago in my PhD when I looked at blockchains, to visualize the campaigns and the adversaries. So we can really, in a 3D model in real time, show you the evidence we have, how the different attack campaigns and attack sequences surround your organization, at which speed they come. And we do all of this in a way that we don't need to go behind anybody's firewall. So this is what we would call zero-touch technology. It's just something we get from the outside world, and we triangulate this information for you as a client to see what's happening and then to act on it in real time. Yeah.
so you don't have to access any client's
No,
firewalls and internal
no.
networks. You
And
just,
we just have an API to orchestrate the data into the endpoints.
yeah.
But when that happens, and therefore I would always say the implementation is crucial, implementing the API correctly, making sure that all endpoints are covered comprehensively. This is the way to get that protection. Yeah.
But that must be a huge comfort for a lot of these heads of security to know that they don't have to open up their entire networks to you and get you working on the inside, because obviously that in itself brings vulnerabilities in some cases. That's really interesting, Ruth, and a much more articulate explanation than I've had previously, I have to admit. So I guess before we close, I need to understand from your own point of view, given your background in different sectors, what are your own personal predictions? What do you think's coming up? What can we expect in 2026? What are your views on what we can all expect to look out for in good and bad scenarios?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, the bad, it is going to be the year of the machine cyber war. And we're already getting a flavor of what is next in terms of the attack subjects. It's not only financial institutions, it's not only airlines and software companies. It is also far beyond critical national infrastructures in the classical sense, energy supplies, road networks, all of these things, because how these are run today, and a lot of people think that they're not online. They're all online, but they often have old software, outdated models. They're very difficult to patch. So for me, the challenge I see is, as there's more nation-state driven cyber war probing of defense capability, we are going to get in very uncomfortable territory from a civil human perspective, right? I wouldn't want to sit on a London underground that's going to crash because somebody doesn't pay the ransomware. But we do see ransomware extortion being very successful and will continue. So ransomware will continue. We have a convergence of risks. So the sophistication of the AI attacks themselves is one element. If you think about how AI helps you as an attacker to identify which are the most precious assets in a data set and to ransom these. And of course, we know that in 40+% of cases, the decryption keys never work. So even if you pay, it doesn't guarantee that you get your stuff back, because the model is a steal on the fly model, really. But we have the other areas of deepfakes, synthetic media threats, which really make identification even more complicated and challenging as it is. ID verification, digital identity, sometimes red flag words for certain countries are already not working at all. And now we have really this deepfake situation, which means there's even more vulnerability. So I would almost say the more everything is digitizing, the more your attack surface increases, almost exponentially. I argued in a report to the UK government last year that we should really do multimodal biometric identification with different random factors. For example, in financial services, which today hasn't really improved authentication at all. But these are the sort of things that will become almost mandatory to somehow stem this risk. So ransomware, deepfakes, ID issues there. Third party, of course, one of my favorites, third party supplier ecosystem risks are through the roof. And this is something that will continue. We know for years that third parties are a sort of a designated launch pad to attack towards yourself. But we have now regulatory regimes in Europe with the Digital Operational Resilience Act. We have the Cyber Act proposal with a bill in the UK. Third-party risks are so critical. And the more an industry like financial services outsources, the more you have that third-party dependency. Cloud has been a huge vulnerability. We have now multi-cloud, hybrid cloud implementations, which is not going to be operationally any easier. And very often the human element in that is actually a challenge because configuration isn't correct. And that creates those issues. But I think one or two pieces that people potentially have overlooked altogether, and they did overlook with the arrival of AI, because everybody rushed into AI implementations without understanding how to deal with the security aspect or even the operational aspect of it. We have shadow AI. So we used to have shadow IT. We definitely will have more shadow AI this year and into the next, where employees are using company data to quickly generate a report or a strategy or a deck. And suddenly all of that sits with an open LLM model, which is an IP issue often. I mean, especially when you're developing software and think you can just test it with third-party open source models. But equally, you have data that you shared that you should have not shared, which is another vulnerability. And of course, you have also this whole AI-driven workforce reduction strategy. Everybody's assessing who can I fire, when can I fire them to cut costs. And the real risk here is that you're losing the human in the loop. It's the same with your automation of SOC and using agentic AI in that area as an example. Losing the human altogether is a huge risk, and having the right humans in the right place is going to be the biggest challenge. So I think these are the ones that are really coming up. And of course, for anybody interested in crypto and decentralized finance, there will be more attacks because these ecosystems are growing. There's legislation on stablecoin encouraging people to use it. That means there will be a bigger market to attack. And equally, of course, quantum, our favorite topic. Eventually, quantum will come. We just don't know when. And having quantum resilient encryption in place as soon as you can is a must for any organization, unfortunately, even for small ones. So these are the sort of things you will have to look at. I think on the positive side, it's
Always
using
positive.
AI using AI in the right way to prevent attacks, to see what's happening out there. Because even if quantum attacks are happening in the future, we're still looking at the adversary space as it prepares for quantum attack. The execution at the end of the day, pressing the button, could be very, very fast. But seeing where it's happening and looking at the OSI model and looking at the different layers where the adversary sits, that's something that we focus on very much, because this is where the risks happen. And this is what is often overlooked by everybody, because people tend to only look at the application layer, which is when the bad outcome is exchanged. But the hacking happens in layer 3, 4, 5, 6, for example.
Well, Ruth, was that a small element of doom and gloom? Let me think about that for a minute. It's the
Realism.
reality.
It's just realism. Yeah.
It's the reality of the world we are now all living in, unfortunately. And if you're trying to do business, whether it's nationally at home or internationally, I think we're all going to be exposed to these threats and have to take into consideration, how do we monitor threats? And, listening to what you've just had to say about Third Watch and Blackwired, it's a must for me. It goes without saying. It's a part of a business process that you must have in place. In some shape or form, I think if people are not having or utilizing a threat intelligence capability, then they're naive to think that they're not going to be vulnerable to, unsophisticated cyber attacks, never mind even the sophisticated ones. So really interesting and very useful insight there, Ruth. I wish we could sit and speak all day, but unfortunately, we've got to get on with our real jobs. So, Ruth, it only leaves me to say thank you so... Exactly. But Ruth Wandhöfer, Head of European Markets for Blackwired, thank you so much for joining me on Let's Talk Cyber.
Thank you so much, Tommy.